Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and recently I picked up an interest in a specific talent that nobody is an Outlaw Rogue, I'm pretty sure, ever used. That is the talent of Parlay. Parlay is a talent that I thought would be a very interesting niche talent for what I thought it was gonna do, but what it ended up doing in Legion made me dismiss it almost immediately as soon as I saw it hit the beta. So then we basically got a talent slot that, in my opinion, feels like an ability that could have been something cool, but somehow feels incomplete, and it's almost like taking up a spot. So I decided to give this ability a full try from a PvP perspective and a PvE perspective to see where Parlay is useful. So this video is going to cover where Parlay can be used, how would one use it for PvP, all the constraints, all the diminishing returns, all the nitty-gritty of Parlay to see if this ability is any good. I want to go through and talk about a bunch of rogue abilities in this fashion. I don't want to make more videos like these where I take an ability, whether it be a talent or an honor talent, break it down into detail to see if it has any potential use. So if you guys want to see more videos like these, be sure to give this video a like and let me know in the comments which other abilities would you want me to cover, be they talents from specs of subtlety, assassination, or outlaw, or the respective honor talents. Without further ado, let's take a look at what Parlay does and if it's functional or viable in any way possible. When we take a look at the ability, what it basically reads is it replaces your blind, it has a 30-yard range, and a 20-second cooldown. So that's already a pretty good constraint in order to make it a decent CC. What it does do is replace a blind, so the CC that it's supposed to bring in is supposed to be better or a modified version of blind. So if this ability, if this talent in any way is a lesser version of blind, then it's definitely not useful. The ability reads that it pacifies the enemy, forcing the enemy to enter basically a dialogue instead of fighting yourself, and it only works on enemies that are not in combat. It works on only a few select creatures, so it doesn't work on beasts or mechanical, so it would mostly be used on humanoids and demons and such. This ability is a very interesting one because of its short cooldown, because of its range, and the way I thought it would work originally would be a lot like a blind. So I felt that it would basically be a blind that could be used in combat at any moment. And at first I thought it would be fitting, so I decided to test what kind of DRs does this ability have. I used Sap because that Sap is an incapacitating effect, and my guess was that Parlay is an incapacitation effect as well. As you can see, Parlay has a very short duration because of the diminishing returns. The original duration of Parlay on players ends up being 4 seconds, which is basically a gouge. And it makes me think whether a gouge is better or a Parlay is better. One of the ways I thought would be cool to combine it for PvP would be to stun the enemy, and then while they're sitting a full 6-second stun, they will be out of combat, to then parlay them at distance without having to close your gap at the enemy or use any energy to CC them. Now, in a realistic PvP situation, this does not always work, but the idea is awesome. So imagine yourself in a situation of a 2v2 arena, and this is where I thought it would be most applicable. First thing I want to test with Parlay, is it on the same DR as Sap? Because since it replaces a blind, my thoughts were, what if it's on the same DR as a blind? Too bad that wasn't the case, so I thought, what if you were able to use Parlay in some crazy CC chain to start a CC on a healer, and be able to keep your distance from a healer while dishing out DPS into the damage dealer of a group. So let's take a 2v2 situation. This is where I want to find applicability for this. The idea behind it is to do what a subtlety rogue does. And in most cases you could just say, why don't you just play a subtlety rogue? I want to see if I can play outlaw and be able to throw a healer in a crazy CC chain. So basically what I want to do is throw a healer in a full 6-second stun, using between the eyes and 6 combo points. The enemy healer is sitting for full 6 seconds, and hopefully the game functions to the point where they drop combat, so that I can throw a Parlay at the enemy while staying on the DPS, whether it's a melee or a caster. So I'm able to dish out as little damage as I can, but whatever damage I can as a rogue, to the DPS, while throwing the healer in at least 10 seconds worth of CC, which opens up opportunities for my healer, whether it be, let's say, a restoration druid or a priest, to be able to throw in a CC that doesn't have a diminishing return within the pool of CC that I'm throwing in. I'm throwing in a stun on the healer, I'm throwing in a sap on the healer. This opens up clones and fears. So you actually create a pretty decent CC chain, and this is something you can execute just about every minute or so. And actually, as an Outlaw Rogue, you can execute this CC chain about every 24 seconds more or less, because you're able to throw the enemy in a full stun for 6 seconds, then it has diminishing returns, and it's about between 20 to 24 seconds more or less to get the stun DR to run out, and then you throw them in a parlay. So every 24 seconds you can throw the enemy in a 10-second CC, and the idea is to whittle the enemy out. The problem with it is currently in Legion, and I'm pretty sure some of you guys have noticed this, the way you are trying to throw the enemy out of combat sometimes does not function as intended. The biggest issue that I saw with this is sometimes you could throw the enemy in a full kidney. Let's say you're subtlety, and I've seen this so many times. You throw the enemy in a full kidney shot, and then you throw them in a full blind, and then you go to sap them, but because they're restoration druid or restoration shaman, they have some kind of healing effects that do healing over time, and the DPS that's in their group is taking damage, so then it puts the healer in combat. If Blizzard is able to fix something like this in Arena, so it would seem a lot like what we had back in Warlords General or back in Pandaria in terms of how combat works, where even if you have a hot on a friendly DPS and they're taking damage, if you haven't engaged in PvP, if you haven't engaged in the actual combat, you drop combat, then you would have a little bit more reliability for it. So because of this effect, Parlay doesn't quite function in Arena in realistic ways, so it ends up being a better option to go for a blind and go with True Bearing, where you're able to recycle the cooldown of your blind. So in PvP it has function, and I have seen it work, but the chance for it to work is super low. So for PvP it's a gimmick, but can Parlay be used for anything else? First we want to take a look at the ability in terms of PvP, but then we want to see if it doesn't work for PvP, where else can it be used? Basically, as an Outlaw Rogue, Parlay is a boosted, beefy steroid worth of sap. It's a CC that lasts on an enemy for 5 minutes. That means you can literally throw an enemy in a CC chain for a whole 5 minutes at a 20 second cooldown interval from a 30-yard range. It does take you out of stealth, so you do want to be at a distance with an enemy, and basically allows you to put 2 enemies in a sap, one of them for a very extended amount, the other is for a normal duration of a sap, which is about a minute. So you have this situation where you're actually able to use the CC as a beefy version of a sap. It doesn't actually end up turning into a blind, it just ends up literally being an incapacitation effect that's super long. Where can this be applicable? This can be applicable in most world situations. You won't really use it on players because, as we talked earlier, Parlay works only for 4 seconds on a player, but on NPCs it takes 5 seconds. Now, what I have been able to do is use, let's say, Withered training. As you can see, I'm next to a bunch of Withered. I've been able to use the Withered training and go through the whole training routine, and I was able to CC so many mobs. It actually allowed me a little bit more control as an Outlaw Rogue when I'm starting with the preparation of the game. When I'm preparing and I can get sap and a parlay on the enemy, or when I'm running with my Withered and I don't want to get too far away from them, or I don't want them to get too close to the enemy, I just parlay the enemies from a distance, and then kind of control my Withered as needed. So Parlay actually has some uses for PvE in terms of controlling mobs, and I feel like Parlay is a very interesting ability that has some applicability, and I could see it be very effective in Mythic Plus dungeons. So in Mythic Plus dungeons, one of the things we have is we have buffs that are given to Mythic Plus the higher the number is. So the higher the number goes, from 3 to 10 to 14 to higher, the higher the number goes, the more buffs the dungeon gets. So mobs can get beefy, mobs can get enraged when they get to a certain low health, mobs can drop a pool of pus that heals friendly mobs and damages players. So there's a lot of things that can go on in the game. So Parlay allows you to establish a lot of control in the opener. So when the mobs, let's say, are hitting way too hard and tank cannot handle more than 3 or 4 of them, you're able to establish a lot more control. So Parlay has some uses. It's not a completely useless ability, but I don't feel like it's a finished ability at all. When you take a look at Parlay in terms of the row that it's in terms of all the other abilities that are available, first one you have is a modifier that removes the energy cost of your Gouge and Blind and Cheap Shot and Sap. I feel like that is an insane advantage for Outlaw, because you're able to use Gouge for both PvE and PvP in order to generate a combo point and control an enemy and interrupt a cast, so there's so much value to it. The second one is Prey on the Weak, which is a bit of watered down version, but Outlaw still has one, where on your Sap, Blind, Gouge, and Cheap Shot, enemies will take 10% more damage. The idea behind it is for PvE and PvP is to use Vanish, cheap shot an enemy that needs to be taken down, and then everybody bursts that enemy, dealing 10% more damage to them. So it gives Vanish a little bit more of applicability as a 2-minute cooldown, because outside of PvE or PvP, I guess, you don't really use it except to run away from an enemy or to drop combat altogether. But then we have Parlay, which is so niche, I feel that most people are just not going to grab it. I feel like this ability could be slightly improved and tuned. If this ability functioned like a blind that you can use a lot more often, or basically took away your blind but basically was a sab that you could use in combat, then I think that would be an interesting ability. Even if it had some kind of energy cost increase, even if it had some crazy cooldown increase, maybe if it was a 1-minute cooldown, I feel then it would be a little bit more applicable for PvE and PvP. I feel like this ability has a lot of potential, and it currently has uses. So what would I rank Parlay? I guess I would say, I guess it's okay, I guess it's useful, could be better. I think it could be better, is my final option. But it's not a completely terrible and useless ability that I once thought it was. It has some funny mechanics that can be used for PvP in order to get that a little bit extra micro control as an Outlaw Rogue, which I think is super interesting because Outlaw Rogue is a spec that has the most amount of CC, and it would be cool if Parlay was changed to the point where it's actually useful in terms of PvP. I'm not sure how Blizzard would do it, but I think it would be really cool if this ability would actually find some use, because in most cases, most people right now are never going to use it unless you're doing wither training, and that is the only time I can see myself using it currently right now, when I'm trying to, let's say, farm the Fox Mount. Pretty sure a lot of people still don't have that one. But this has been it for me and Parlay for the day. Just take a look at the ability, and it actually isn't too terrible. It's not that amazing, but it has some uses. So if you guys want to see me review another ability in the future, maybe a little bit in more detail, because it's my very first time, let me know in the comments below. Give this video a like because it definitely helps out my channel, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see all of you in the next one.